want racism to end everywhere. I don't want communism. That's for sure. I believe we might be able to now go to Maurice Mcleod, who is CEO of Race on the Agenda. Maurice, thank you very, very much for joining us. Great to have you on board. Look, what's your view on whether or not the Tokyo Olympics were right to ban athletes from taking the knee?
Seems a very strange announcement to make, I think, because if you think of it, the Olympics doesn't sanction people making political statements anyway, so that's always been the case. But the most iconic, or to me, one of the most iconic Olympic pictures is John Carlos and Tommy Smith in 1968 with the fist in the air. They weren't allowed to do that, and in fact, it ended both of their careers pretty much by doing it. So I'm not really sure what the Olympics is trying to say by saying we're banning political statements. They never sanctioned them in the first place, and I imagine there will be some, and then the athletes will take their punishment or whatever, depending on what they do.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing. And look, this is as you will have heard, no doubt, there from my introduction. This is my issue with it, which is that yes, I think of course, I shouldn't have to say this, but I believe I do in the current climate. I'm clearly very anti-racism. I think that's a terrible thing, right? However, I do also feel as though the Black Lives Matter movement is more than just an anti-racist movement. There is a political agenda there. They have a manifesto online. I've just read some of it out live on air, and I don't know if people know that. And I think that's an issue for me. Do you feel as though there's a danger here of people getting sucked into the Black Lives Matter movement without knowing necessarily what it's all about?
I'd have to disagree with you slightly. I think that there is an organisation called Black Lives Matter in the US and Black Lives Matter in the UK, which has, political desires. That's a fact. When people are taking the knee, or when people are going on the marches, or I went on a load of marches last year, and I have to say I'm quite sympathetic to the things that Black Lives Matter are asking for. That's not when I'm taking a knee or going on marches. That's not what people are doing. They're not saying we support this political party or we support this manifesto. They're saying we want to end racism. That's all they're saying. And so I think it's a bit of a conflation when people say, oh, you're taking a knee, but this party argues for dismantling capitalism. That's not the conversation. That's just their analysis of why.
But I think that's the conversation they want to have, though, isn't it? And I'm fully with you. And this is kind of my point, really, which is that most people, absolutely the vast majority of people who go on Black Lives Matter marches or indeed just support them, for example, are basically just saying we don't like racism and we think what happened to George Floyd was wrong. And that undoubtedly is clearly what most people, that's their primary focus. However, behind the scenes here, you have Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrice Cullors, who's got 4 homes, £3 million property empire. She bought a $1.4 million home in, by the way, the largely white district of Topanga Canyon, Los Angeles. 88% of residents are white there. Black Lives Matter has had $90 million in donations. There's no accounts published as to where all of that goes. I'm just a bit concerned here, Maurice, that we might be having the wool pulled over our eyes. There's a lot of people creaming off the top of this organisation, which is supposed to just stand up for anti-racism, isn't it?
I'm really loath to talk about Black Lives Matter in the US, for instance. It's an organisation out there that was pivotal in sorting out the protests and the demonstrations. It was one of the organisations that facilitated that. When you go on the march, you're not expressing political support for them in particular, and where the leader of that group happens to live or where she's bought a house, I think that's completely irrelevant. Let's concentrate on the issue that they're flagging up, not the messenger. Okay,
well, look, let's get back at it then in terms of the International Olympic Committee banning political statements. This is what they're saying is they banned statements by athletes at the Games. The new policies, I'm just reading from it now, the new policies were drafted after 2 US athletes were reprimanded for podium gestures at the Pan American Games in August. Athletes are prohibited by the Olympic Charter's Rule 50 from taking a political stand in the field of play. So there we are. So this is the news, of course, that the Tokyo Olympics have decided to ban athletes from taking the knee. Do you expect that they will still do it anyway?
Yes, I absolutely expect they will, and I think they probably should. I mean, the Olympics doesn't own sport. The Olympics, is a money-making organisation, and why they don't want politics is it takes away from, some of their advertisers might be annoyed or whatever. That's nothing to do with. Why is sport the one area where politics isn't involved? We have politics in music, in art. Politics is part of our life. So why can't someone express that, on the sporting field as well? I don't see any reason why not.
How do you feel about the fact that it's still going on in terms of taking the knee with the in the Premier League, for example. I think. Well, I mean, where does it stop? I mean, is this just something that's going to happen before every single game now? And my argument to that would be, look, okay, yes, Black Lives do matter. That should go without saying. But there's a lot of other bad stuff happening in the world as well, isn't there? There's rampant human rights abuses in China, for example. The Middle East is not exactly a particularly squeaky clean part of the world. Women's rights are a huge issue over there. I mean, where does this end? Do we end up taking a knee for Black Lives Matter, putting a fist up in the air for the Uyghur Muslims in China, and then, I don't know, what do we do? Stand on one leg for people who can't vote in Iran? I mean, where does this end,
Well, where did the protests calling for racism to be over end? I guess when racism ends, surely. I will agree with you. Even as someone that loves football and works in anti-racism, I think making any kind of demonstration, making it obligatory, so it feels like all the players have to kneel, and I know they don't, but it feels like that. You'd feel really weird if you didn't. That sort of thing, or wearing a poppy or whatever, that sort of forced emotion, forced political statement where you all have to do this, otherwise you're bad. That sort of thing leaves me a bit uneasy. But, for players, many of whom are black, a quarter of Premier League players are black, to be taking a knee, that, many of them probably aren't Uyghurs. Many of them, not many of them are women. Not many of them are. So if that's an issue that they want to make a stand on, I say all power to them.
I think you make some good points. I think, look, put it this way: if I was, in a completely different universe where I was remotely athletic and I won a gold medal at the Olympic Games, and I decided not to take the knee for Black Lives Matter, or I was a Premier League footballer and I decided I was literally the only person, my team's Manchester United, and I was the only member of Manchester United who didn't take the knee at the start of a game. I would be doing that, not as any comment on my views on racism or racial issues or anything like that. I would be doing it because, for me personally, the Black Lives Matter organisation is so intertwined with its politics, and I disagree with those politics, that I personally would not take a knee for it. Would you be offended by me not taking the knee?
I can't be offended by someone not doing something. No, absolutely not. I would imagine in that case, if every other player did and you were standing there, you'd get asked questions. And I imagine you'd then say, well, I'm not doing it because, I believe X, Y, or Z. Cool. And you will be criticised or not by your stance. And I think that's perfectly legitimate. I wouldn't be offended by it, though. No, of course not.
Okay. Well, no, I thought that's a really interesting thing, because I think there is a lot of fear out there from people, really, and I think rightly so. I can understand why there's a lot of fear from people out there about not wanting to be perceived as putting your foot in it, as it were, or not wanting to be seen as not supporting what is clearly a huge issue in the world. No one is denying that there is racism out there and that racism needs to be stopped. I think, from my own perspective, as I've made clear, abundantly clear here, is that I think the Black Lives Matter organisation crosses that Rubicon for me and transcends the world of politics. And actually, it's quite a radical notion of politics that I fundamentally disagree with. So look, I suppose we've dealt with the idea now that the Tokyo 2020 is still going to be called 2020, isn't it? Even though it's taking place in 2021, they've decided that they're going to ban. If you're just joining us, they're going to ban athletes from taking the knee. I suspect that we're still going to see it anyway. Really, do you feel, Maurice, that actually this isn't going to end anytime soon, that right across now, the world of sports and politics and everything, that actually the Black Lives Matter movement is here to stay, and that actually, we're going to keep seeing people taking the knee for essentially forever until, as you put it, racism ends, which unfortunately, is not going to happen, is it?
Well, okay. So I think that there will always, and there always have been, people are excited by Black Lives Matter at the moment. Back in the 60s, it was Black Power. There's always something that people are upset about, and there's always been people complaining about racism. And so until there is no racism, there will carry on being protests. They might evolve and be different. It'll be something other than taking a knee or putting a fist in the air, but it will carry on. People will always want to raise their voices, I think, to speak out against racism.
Maurice, great to have you on. Thank you very, very much. Really enjoyed that discussion. Maurice Mcleod there, CEO of Race on the Agenda, reacting to the news this week that the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games have banned athletes from taking the knee. What's your view on